What we're about to reveal to you today may seem inconceivable, and yet a virtual tidal wave of economic experts and political insiders insist that it's 100% fact. The United States government is only months away from a total financial collapse. After decades of fiscal mismanagement, whispers have begun to spread that the foundation of the federal government has become damaged beyond repair. A default of epic proportions is on the horizon and could bring our entire system down with it. The situation has become so dire, in fact, that a redrawn map of the United States has actually been created. One that completely transforms the layout of the entire country, and not every state will survive. We'll show it to you in just a few moments. We'll also reveal a shocking piece of information never before made public. It's common knowledge among the DC elite, but not something everyday Americans are privy to. Over the last 4 months, we've brought together an all-star team of researchers and analysts to help drill down on this story and to expose the truth behind the official statements and executive reports. And today, they help us crack open the most important issue we've ever crossed, the fate of the United States of America.
You know, we hear all these rumors about the federal government getting ready to seize up, and every so often you hear about there's not going to be any Social Security. And guess what? It's probably all true at some point. This is going to happen. And the reason it's going to happen is we've just been on this massive spending spree. And if you think 2007, 2008 was the collapse because we were spending too much and we sent housing prices up, you ain't seen nothing yet. That was a minor crash compared to what could happen.
Yeah, everything seems to be okay on the surface, but it's really no different than with, like if you were a drug addict or an alcoholic. When the drugs and the booze are flowing freely, everything's great. But in the financial world, the equivalent of drugs and alcohol for us is just easy money. And with the Fed printing money nonstop, it gives this illusion that all is well when it's really not.
I don't care what bubble you look at throughout history. You can take the most recent example of the mortgage and credit crisis. You could go back to the early 2000s with the dot-com bubble. They all burst. And right now, we have a bubble within our Federal Reserve. The bubble is the US dollar. There's too many of them in circulation, and it will come home to roost. That's a mathematical certainty.
In 2008, when the banks should have defaulted, you had the federal government step in and basically rescue bankers. So they transferred wealth from the citizens to the bankers. And now the country's broke as a result of all of the money that they transferred to these bankers. And, you know, there's no one to bail out the federal government. They're the last man standing in the room.
In 1971, President Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, essentially leaving the dollar backed by nothing but the full faith and confidence of the U.S. government. Many experts point to this move as the prime catalyst for the crisis we find ourselves in today.
The problem is we're a totally confidence-based society, backed by nothing. And already we're seeing this confidence erode. I mean, who here has any trust in the housing market anymore? We already suffered a collapse through the housing crisis. No one really wants to lend us money anymore, so we're just printing it nonstop. So don't think about when the house of cards might collapse and the confidence might start eroding. It's already happening right now.
You know, we have full faith and credit in the US dollar, but we know that the US obligations, the debt obligations that the US government has, the Treasury has, are so much higher. They're trillions of dollars more than what's being stated on the books and trillions of dollars more than we can actually afford. In fact, the US as a country is insolvent if you looked at what we have on our balance sheet in terms of assets versus liabilities. So the fact that we're even operating as a country and we're doing well and we're moving forward means that there's something else behind all of this, and that something else is the faith that one day we will repay all of this debt. But once that faith is gone, that means everything comes to an end. You know, party's over.
We've examined the causes for what's led us to this crucial point in history: skyrocketing debt, a weakening dollar, an economy based solely on faith. But how would a financial collapse of the federal government actually take place here in the U.S.? What would it take for this unimaginable scenario to become a reality?
But where it would happen here, it would be a series of bills that would be passed, and you would know this ahead of time in the discussions that would be going on in Congress. They'd be talking about, let's see, where is all the money these days? Well, the money's in the 401k accounts. Well, what can we do with that money? Well, we could probably take it, but we can't really just take it because then we'd have anarchy in the streets. Let's put in a series of laws that says all the money that's sitting in the retirement account, maybe 20 or 30 or 50% of it has to go towards buying one investment. And that one investment has to be U.S. Treasury bonds. After all, we're paying you interest, so what's wrong with that? That's going to be your tip-off that something's going down, is when they start talking about, quote unquote, nationalizing your retirement accounts.
What we've learned in the last few years is that financial markets have tremendous volatility, and you see what they call flash crashes. All we would need is a flash crash in the US dollar, and that would spike interest rates. If interest rates spike, you could see a scenario like this playing out. You could see, first of all, interest rates go up, and then the federal government has to pay more of their budget in interest than they would be paying in these other programs. As a result of that, you see a credit downgrade, and then you have to wonder if countries around the globe aren't going to ask for their money back.
You know, this talk, every once in a while you're hearing more frequently about a flash crash in the dollar. And this is a very serious situation because a flash crash in the US dollar would represent the biggest currency collapse in the history of the universe as we know it. There is no stronger currency, there has been no stronger empire, there's been no stronger economy ever.
Look, what people need to realize is it could be something as simple as interest rates ratcheting higher. It could be China calling our debt. It could be a flash crash on the dollar. Any of these variables could lead to federal default.
How could a flash crash occur? It's really quite simple. With the advent of high-frequency trading and supercomputers, hedge funds can gang up on a single stock and send its value plunging 30, 40, even 50% in a matter of seconds. They crash these companies based on selling levels automatically programmed into their mainframes. The terrifying part is that these computers have the ability to crash the dollar the exact same way, with no human emotion or judgment involved. And unlike a stock, which can rebound in a matter of days, the entire country would be powerless to recover if our currency saw its value plunge in the blink of an eye.
If we have a scenario where the dollar crashes, I mean, you have to think that there's about 3 days worth of food supply in the average grocery store. So once that's exhausted, you could have food riots, and shortly thereafter you can have looting. And from that point forward, it's, you know, it could be pure chaos because people aren't prepared for it.
What happens when all of a sudden the EBT cards don't work? What happens when people don't get their Social Security checks? What happens if doctors don't get paid for Medicare and Medicaid? Then you have absolute, complete chaos because the federal government is intertwined in every area of our lives. They have weaseled their way into everything, and that's why you could see a big collapse.
People wonder how fast this could unfold. And if I told you you're going to lose your job in 5 years from now, you could plan for that. But if I told you you're going to lose your job tomorrow and your savings were going to be instantly wiped out, there's no way to prepare for that. Now, in this situation, I've read all the policies, I know the systems that are in place, and this rate of descent can't be controlled. It could happen in a week.
If an event occurred where it caused the entire country to come to a standstill, interest rates would just shoot up. Interest rates would shoot up, the economy would come to a standstill. And that would be that crash that you look for, because that's the crash you're not coming back from, because the only way you're going to make the economy work again is to start printing. Printing, printing, printing. And when you do that, it means Germany, the Weimar Republic, wheelbarrows full of cash to go out there and buy a loaf of bread. Nobody would be selling us their products because our dollar would be worthless. We're just printing and printing.
The U.S. is no stranger to hyperinflation either. 4 years after the Civil War ended, hyperinflation pushed the price of a sack of grain to $1,200 in the southern states. Scary, isn't it? Well, that fear is beginning to run rampant throughout the country and the government itself. In fact, one of the most shocking pieces of information we've uncovered in our investigation is the existence of a redrawn map of the United States. And here today, for the very first time, we're able to show this highly controversial document. What you're seeing is a post-collapse America, where following the default by the federal government, not every state is able to survive. Copies of the map show as few as 34 states remaining in the United States, with boundaries being redrawn and over 16 states ceasing to exist altogether. Obviously, no official comment on this map has been made, but it's clear that some states have already seen the writing on the wall. Several states, including Texas and Wyoming, have actually drafted legislation to prepare themselves for operating on their own without the financial support of Washington behind them. So how real are these doomsday scenarios, and are you living in a state that may soon no longer exist?
I was pulled into an office on Capitol Hill where they showed me this map, and they told me about the plans that the United States already has for emergency procedures. And the U.S. is going to be broken up into regions just like the FEMA map tells us and just like this map tells us.
The map is based on the FEMA disaster map, and we can't be so naive to think that the federal government doesn't have multiple versions of this in the event of a disaster. And it really didn't take long for our team of analysts to use readily available data to redraw the map of the United States in the event of a federal default. We used manufacturing data, we used how much tax revenue is received from the federal government for each state, and individual preparations those states have made to exist on their own.
There's a map out there that shows you basically in black and white who's going to make it and who's not going to make it. And there's 30 to 35 states that are going to make it, and there's about 15 states that are just not going to make it. And these are the states that have been sucking the blood out of the rest of the country, out of the federal government, out of the economy, just living a massive subsidized lifestyle. And once that reservoir of blood is gone, those states are going to be non-existent.
Well, I think there's some states that just won't survive. They're in desperate economic straits. Places like California, Michigan, Maryland, New York, New Jersey. I mean, people are still homeless from Sandy. And we're seeing a desperate situation, and I don't know if these states have the finances to be able to recoup.
In some instances, the federal government supplies over a third of the state's revenue. So think about walking into work one day and getting a 40% pay cut. Could you live off of that? Probably not. So you're seeing with this redrawing of the United States, some states that just can't function without the federal government. But on the other side, you're seeing some states that are saying, forget the federal government, we're going to prepare for this imminent collapse. We're going to have to learn how to exist on our own. And you've already seen just the inkling of this idea go from just being a thought to actually going into legislation, where states are actually forming committees and preparing for the inevitability of having to exist on their own.
Look, the states that stand no chance of surviving a federal collapse are states like Arizona, Nevada, New Jersey, Florida. These are the states that right now already suffer from high unemployment rates and virtually no thriving industry. You take the federal dollars away from that, they don't have a leg to stand on.
Well, you've seen the redrawn map. You've seen what the United States would look like if the federal government seizes up. And it isn't pretty. If you're living in a state targeted for termination, if you're already retired or plan to retire in the next couple of years, if you're financially supporting your children or grandchildren, or if you're living on a fixed income, then what I'm about to reveal impacts you more than anyone else. Over the course of our 4-month investigation, we uncovered a strategy that America's top lawmakers are already using to safeguard their wealth. Codenamed the Mayflower Maneuver, this simple strategy throws its users an extraordinary lifeline. It ingeniously creates a steady stream of wealth, one powerful enough to endure any crisis. For those who are privy to the Mayflower Maneuver, I'm talking about the people following the strategy to the letter of the law. Well, they already had the opportunity to pocket as much as $79,000 this year alone. And if the federal government ever does collapse, then the value of the Mayflower Maneuver would shoot even higher. It's one of the most brilliant, yet simple, wealth protection strategies that our experts have ever seen.
This thing is a real moonshot because there are specific parameters on this trade that measure fear, they measure panic, they measure greed. And if you get in at the right points, and we know what these points are, if you get in at these right points, the profits could be limitless.
We've been tracking the chatter about the Mayflower Maneuver and with increasing intensity because it is absolutely legitimate. And what you're seeing is it's almost appalling. What public officials are saying to the public, what they're willing to admit about the likelihood of the default is much different than what they're doing with their own money.
You know, when you look at the politicians, when you look at the history of politics, you know, the one thing that has shone through more than anything, the one thing that you can find from every politician, all the way from the bootlegging politicians whose kids became president, you know, what you've seen is it's all about self-preservation, it's all about greed. These guys have access to information long before anybody else does, and you can bet your bottom dollar they're all positioning themselves to make money out of anything that happens, especially a crisis.
When we dug into the Mayflower maneuver, we discovered the inner workings, and it's really quite simple. It just hinges upon one key metric in the U.S. economy that happens to fluctuate over time. And insiders have been exploiting that fluctuation for profits for years. But the strategy is so straightforward, there's nothing preventing everyday Americans from doing the same thing.
The Mayflower maneuver is a very, very specific and special trade. And the reason is because we figured out the endpoints of the trade. We know that X occurs when there's fear and Y occurs when there's greed. So we know when to get in and we know when to get out. And that makes it much easier, a much safer bet for us.
Whether or not the U.S. government does finally reach its breaking point, one thing is certain. The Mayflower maneuver is making money right now. As I already told you, for those who have pulled the trigger on this brilliant strategy, exactly as outlined, well, they've pocketed as much as $79,000 this year alone. And if the federal government ever actually does default, within a minute of the news, the value of the Mayflower maneuver would blast even higher. That's why, as a follow-up to our investigation, we've prepared a briefing for you on the Mayflower maneuver. Simply follow the link below to secure all the details. Then you'll see for yourself just how easy this strategy is. Again, to secure your free copy of Mayflower Maneuver Briefing, please follow the link below. I'm Ted Capshaw.
People keep saying that America's going to collapse. There are communities in America that are already collapsing and have collapsed. We have cities that are in desperate, desperate shape.
If there is one thing that I can convey to every American listening here, is to be aware. Don't listen to what you're being told out of Washington or even out of Wall Street, right coming out of the financial center of the world. What they're saying and the preparations that are being made behind the scenes are two entirely different things. So look for those subtleties, look for the opportunity to see what the true crisis is.
You know, we keep thinking that we're the greatest country in the world, which we are, but even the greatest country in the world has to be built on a very solid and stable foundation, and that's something that's been eroding over the last 50, 70 years, but it's accelerated in the last 10, 15 years with the amount of debt we've put on, the amount of entitlement spending that's going on. It's unsustainable. It's mathematically impossible to survive, and we all need to get a really serious wake-up call before this consumes our entire government and our entire system as we know it today.